This is the Content Strategy Insights podcast, episode number 170. As the digital landscape has become more diverse and complex, online customers end up consuming all kinds of information, jumping from one location to another to piece together the answers they need. Scott Abel has thoughts about how to improve this situation, a concept that he calls content unification. Unifying your content operations both improves your company's ability to create and deliver useful content experiences and smooths out your customers' journeys.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 170 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really delighted today to welcome back to the show Scott Abel. Scott is best known as the Content Wrangler. That's probably how you've heard about him online. But he also serves as a content strategy evangelist for a company called Heredo. So welcome, Scott. Tell the folks a little bit more about your wrangling and evangelism these days.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show today. I appreciate it, Larry. My name is Scott Abel, and I serve as a content wrangler, and that really just means I'm a content strategist, and I created a name for myself, a brand name, about 20 years ago called the Content Wrangler. It just seemed like what I was trying to do at the time, wrangle content, or herd cats, or however you like to say it. But today I also wear a second hat, and I serve as a content strategy evangelist for a company known as Heredo. Heredo makes a component content management system, which is a type of advanced content management system that's designed to handle modular pieces of smaller granular content and weave them together for you in meaningful ways using automation and other kinds of technology tricks.
Yeah, and that sounds like the reason I wanted to have you back on the show. We talked a few weeks ago about the notion of content unification. That sounds like one tool in that kit, but tell me, I was really intrigued by just the term content unification. Tell me what you mean by that.
Yeah, when I say content unification, I'm really just using dictionary definitions. And if you think about it, the opposite of unification is could be anything from disorganized or multiple, resources to chaos. It can be, but it's not streamlined. It's not one-stop shopping. And so I've been thinking a lot about the fact that we live in this kind of drive-through window mentality economy where people expect things very quickly. You can press a button and have lots of things delivered to you in many places in the world in record time. And you can have lots of services made extremely available to you in easy to access ways. And so having information that's difficult to parse or locate or access or use seems silly today, especially when many places are siloed. And they create information in different places, and then they end up publishing to different places. And then the consumer is forced to jump from place to place in this kind of crazy, orchestration where they're trying to assemble all the bits and pieces to make something a whole, so they can answer their problem, questions or whatever they have that they want to know about your product. And they shouldn't have to go to 3 or 4 different resources to do that, right? It's just silly. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of energy, and it frustrates them. And it also opens up lots of room for error, because if they have to go to 3 different websites and remember 3 different logins, there's 3 different chances for them to have a failure. And then eventually they're no longer in a positive mood about your brand. They're thinking about you negatively. So I've just been thinking about unification as a smart thing to do for consumers. But on the flip side, it's kind of smart for us as content creators too, because the organizations we work for can unify the way that we create content, the terminology we use, the taxonomies we use, and maybe even be able to exchange information between departments internally, which would be a benefit that would be more obvious to us as content creators, but would also help downstream the consumers that access the information, because we would be putting all of our resources into making one great unified interface for people to interact with our brand.
Yeah, and as you say that, you're reminding me of 2 of the big things. Well, the biggest thing is that notion. One of the biggest things is that notion of busting through the silos and realizing that this customer, they don't care what your silos are. They just want to get things done. And there's some technical challenges and administrative and organizational challenges in addressing that. Do you have success stories of people who've done this, who sort of unified that messaging for their folks so that they're achieving all those noble ambitions you just described?
Yeah, there's a host of companies doing it, and many, in the world that I'm certain that I'm not aware of, but some that I am aware of or more aware of there's a company called Reltio, which is a master data management company, so technology oriented company, and they've been savvy enough to be able to bring all of their product information together in one place, or at least they're in the process of doing that right now. So what that means is that they might have training information about their products. They may have customer support information about their products. They may have technical documentation about their products. They may have product specifications and details that are relevant to the people who are their customers. And they are working in a concerted effort to bring all that together into one digital online portal where they can provide access to that information and utilize the capabilities of component content management systems like Hereto to help them deliver individualized experiences, for example, to reduce the amount of friction and frustration that people experience trying to find information when they have to jump from site to site to site. And they're also helping internally organize their content and getting everybody to kind of sing with the same voice, if you will, so that it sounds like it all comes from the same company. It doesn't sound like it came from different, totally different departments and totally different countries, and totally different languages. And they're also figuring out that this benefits them because they can start to track performance. They can put analytics tracking software on their online portal, and they can see which content is performing, which content is actually doing what they thought it would do, and which content is not. And then they can optimize that content or the way that they produce it or deliver it in order to achieve those performance goals that they were failing to meet earlier. And without unifying it and controlling it in a componentized content management system, it's really difficult for companies like Reltio to be able to see what's going on with their content. But when they have kind of transparency and they can see the content and how it's performing, they can make smart business decisions about where to put their resources to provide better experiences in the future. So what would they invest after they've unified everything? And so that's where companies like Reltio, who are much more mature, if you used a maturity process to map out where they are, they're probably like an 8 or a 9, out of 10. And they're on their way now to the next best thing that they're going to do to improve their content. So they're kind of a great example of company that's doing it right.
That's great. And as you said, is the CCMS the unifying thing? Because I know people, and the reason I ask is that I know folks who are approaching this from like a federation approach. They're pulling stuff from a number of sources. But in this case, did you go, I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but is it all in one CMS or one CCMS in this case?
I would imagine that the majority of the content that they're trying to weave together is in the CCMS, but you would see opportunity for external resources to be pulled in, and it depends on how you implement software and a bunch of other technology things, what it is you can do with it. But there's absolutely no reason you wouldn't be able to find creative ways to merge unstructured and structured content together, for example, and bring it together in one place, or at least make it easier for people to get to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you talk about that, that sounds like there's this newish field that people have talked about a lot, the notion of customer experience and how we, just how we organize this. Is that like an adjacent organizing scheme for this notion of content unification?
I'm not sure if adjacent's the right word for it, although I see where you're going with that. I think what I would describe it as, it's like a driving force for some of the ideas that come about when people are trying to solve content problems, because they have to have a reason for investing in solving problems. And often the reason is our experience is what matters. We've been told by our customers that they value the experience. We've been told by our customers when the experience is bad, they don't want to do business with us anymore. We've been told by customers who we did give bad experience to that we are not coming back and we do not want to give you any more money. And we've also learned from customers that have bad experiences that they went on social media and told other people about their bad experiences, which started a bad experience storytelling hour online about our brand. And so brands that have experienced the negative implications of providing a less than desirable experience have started to focus on trying to figure out how do they produce the great experience that everybody wants. And the problem with us, the content people, is that we're not often center in that conversation, because I don't think it dawns on executives at the moment that they determine they have a customer experience problem, that it's a content investment that could help them overcome the experience problem because content fuels experiences. But we think of experiences as everything, right? And in totality, it is. It's how you feel. It's your perception about the brand. It's how you feel you were treated by a human being. It's how the voice that talked to you on the voicemail sounded to you. It's the words that they use when they send you a message, right? It's all those things together. And so I think as we start to think about unifying a customer experience, we're going to see that it's not just content people playing in the game. So we've got to elevate our game and start running out there and telling people, hey, wait a minute, there is no experience without content. So you can't have a content discussion, a customer experience discussion that's going to lead to anything dramatically improved without acknowledging that there's some content that touches each one of these experiences, and that may be part of the challenge in delivering the great experiences, that the content isn't optimized so you can do so.
Right. I got to say, I just love that. I'm going to quote you constantly now, that content fuels experiences. You couldn't have known this before we went on, but the episode right before you is going to be Dan Mall, the design systems guy. And I was asking him about design systems stuff, and we kind of talked just generally about design systems. Then I kind of transitioned into content, and I asked him, like, how important is content? He goes, content is like, and he just went off on how important content is. So designers are getting it. Yeah, no, I think
it's happening. I think that's the message between you and I, is that when we go to conferences and we see each other, we're excited to talk about these topics. It's like, the content word nerds having a, exciting discussion about things that our partners and relatives don't care about, right? Because they're not deep in the trenches of the content world the way we are. But you're right. Our secrets are starting to escape. They're starting to leak out and find homes in other disciplines. And sometimes that's a little agitating because those people are adopting and starting from scratch. So they're kind of making all the same mistakes we made before in the past. And we're like, hey, just like a parent to a teenager, don't do that because it would be better if you didn't, because I did it before and look what happened to me. But unfortunately, I think they're going to have to go through the rigmarole of making a few mistakes along the way. And eventually we'll hear better opportunities to improve the customer experience throughout departments that recognize content as part of the game.
Yeah, no, and my whole mission with this podcast is to democratize content strategy and all of its practices and all that stuff. So any steps forward there are great. But hey, I want to back up a little bit from these. Sure. These are all great insights and how you got there. But I love, we talked earlier just a little bit, and I want to hear more details about some of the research and observations that underlie this need and inform this need for content unification. You talked a lot about like how developers actually get information, for example.
Yeah, it's interesting. Software developers are surprisingly customers. So customers are human, and so too are most developers. I would imagine you could have ChatGPT develop a little bit for you, but they're still not developers. Software developers are people. They deserve the same experiences as everyone else. That seems like an obvious thing to say, but that's not how it's practiced a lot of times. There is this fallacy or myth or whatever that's being spread around that developers don't need contextual information because, after all, they're super smart and they know how to develop code and I don't, and so therefore they must know more than me. And so a lot of content people bow to the declarations made by some software developers that all you need to do is just give me the code and I'll figure it out. That's my job. Don't be writing all that mumbo jumbo and confusing me with all those words. But as it turns out, scientists, academics said, that's interesting. Let's study developers. And so I went and did some research recently, and I found all the research I could surrounding API documentation. And they were by educators around the world looking for patterns in the research. And the research that they did were two types. And the very obvious type is the first type, which all of us have probably participated in, a survey. What do software developers need from the content that we provide? And the answer is usually ask the developer. So they do. They ask the developer, and the developer tells you all the things that they need, right, based on the survey. And then the researchers analyze all the survey data and they come up with their findings. Then along come some other researchers who are stumbled upon the API research, and they say, that's nice. There's also a bunch of human research that says that humans in general, not just software developers, when asked in a survey what they do, seldom actually do what they say they do. So we don't believe those developers. It would be better so we're not calling them liars, we're calling them humans, right? It would be better if we did a second type of research called observational studies. And when they watch developers do what they do, and they control it in a scientific experiment. And so think about it this way. Some developers would be given the code that they say that's all they need, right? And they can figure it out all by themselves. Like, don't give us any documentation. Okay, great, we won't. So you're in the test, and there you go. That's what you get. And then you tell another group of developers, you can use the documentation and you can use this code. And you tell another group, you can use the documentation and the internet. You tell another group, you can use the documentation, the internet, and some books. And then you give them all the same assignment and you time them and you see, are they correct? How long did it take them to do it? And were they able to accomplish it with the resources you gave them without reaching outside of what they were using for information? And as it turns out, lots of developers end up having to retroactively go back to the documentation to try to find something that they need. And that was surprising to the researchers because the developers in the surveys where they self-disclosed what they needed, as opposed to somebody watching them do work, they didn't align. And so it was what they said is not what they did. And so that's important for us to know, right? The other thing, the developers come in different education levels. And I don't mean that one person may have more developer experience. I mean, they may have different kinds of experience. And so they may know the same development software language, but they may not have worked in the industry that language is being used in before. So let's say that you're a developer for a banking system. You would have to know financial services terminology as it relates to what you do. And so some developers may be slower at consuming our information, but it doesn't mean that they're not good at programming. It means they're trying to understand the arena they're in, the landscape of the industry that they're serving in. And some of them need to know more. So the researchers identified two types of developers: systematic developers, they call them, and opportunistic developers. Systematic developers would be, I'm going to start with opportunistic. Opportunistic developers see an opportunity to grab some code and start working. They will grab it and play and tinker. And if it fails, they'll try again. And if it still fails, they'll look for a different solution. But they're all about the chase. They want to get to the solution as fast as they can, and they're not interested in anything else. But the systematic developer is about confidence. They want to know, what is this thing? Why did you develop it? What was it designed to do? How do we know it does that? What if it doesn't do that? Like all the conceptual things, right? Before they touch any code, they won't even play around with it. And so you've got these two groups of people that are the same, right? They're both developers and they're both human, but they have different styles. And so technical writers, for example, in the content management space, have been dividing up the audiences for a long time and delivering little slices of information that are slightly different based on the persona of the people they're aiming at. And so if you think that developers are human and they deserve the best experience possible, you want to serve up the right chunks of information for them too. And so now we're borrowing from technical documentation the lessons about delivering personalized, individualized experiences, and we're delivering them to developers. And the developers are saying, wow, this content is pretty good. But, we assume because they're developers that they're different. So I think our lesson here is that most people are, 99% similar, and the differences are things we should address, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to do content for them. It means that you have to do content in a way that aligns nicely with how they need it and how they work.
Nice. I'm really curious now about how it sounds like the simplest case you have like it's like personaization almost versus person. You have these two major personas, and how is that delivered technically? Like you have like profiles, or like how do you tailor that content delivery or that kind of thing?
Usually this is driven by having a component content management system means that you can have small pieces of information and you can give each piece a name. So like a product description would have a name. And you would know that it's a product description, right? So anytime that you needed to use the product description, you could pull it in automatically, and it would be the same product description used everywhere, so that when people encounter it, it won't be confusing because it won't be different. It'll be the same. And so you needed technology like a component content management system to help you manage and weave those together. And you'll need a delivery engine to push the right pieces to the right people. And usually that's done in a combination of two things. One is there's a login with a profile. That's one approach, where you can say, this person is a manager, so you serve them content that's better for managers. And you would tag those little pieces of content in your component content management system with something that indicates this is more appropriate for a manager. And then when managers log in, they would see more specific manager content. The second factor that comes into play here is taxonomy and metadata, right? It's how you categorize and what names you call things. And when you do that and you use them consistently and you have a system that helps you manage them, you can then ask the system to automatically generate content that's tagged or categorized a specific way and serve that up as the offering that you give to that person. And so you know something about them, you remember that thing about them, and then you recommend content based on what you remember.
Nice. As you say that, I'm reminded of like one of the ways that can happen is like auto tagging of content, like as you're working, because that's one of those things in authoring systems. It's like no human being wants to do all the tagging. So they're often relying on machines, which kind of brings us to like this new task helping assistant we all have, these AI agents that are out there. How are those working into these systems?
I would say not only is AI a hot topic, and you're right about that, it's most useful when we can do things to help move our professions ahead, right? So it's not so much about replacing us as it is, how can it augment us and make us better at what we do? And so in my mind, AI superpowers are needed at both ends of the content spectrum. At the beginning where, let's say, the content production line where people, brainstorm, what should we need some content. And, right there is a chance to use AI to brainstorm ideas for your content. But AI can help you create, optimize, structure, organize, validate, automate, publish, deliver, report upon, lots of things. Even kind of doing rote tasks that you think might not be very complex, like inserting a table into a document and then creating the table row headers and the column headers and then putting the data in. That can take a little bit of time, but people are often surprised when you record them, how long it takes them, and then how long it takes ChatGPT to do the same thing with just a prompt. So our investment in time now, I think, with AI is about creating prompts that provide value. So if you spend $200 creating a prompt that provides you $10,000 worth of value, and then you give that prompt to all of your 9 writers who are on your team, and then they all equally use it 10 times a month or whatever, and then it saves $100,000, you can get the ROI really quickly because you know how much time you spent to write the prompt, and you know what the prompt is doing for you and how much time it takes. And then you've, of course, earlier recorded the manual task and how long it took you and what you paid those people to do that task. And you can easily see that the AI is going to help you. I think where we're at now is that we are going to see 2 kinds of AI. The AI at the other end, so it spits out the content for people and it generates, prose, et cetera, the magical write me a party invitation for 4 people at a barbecue, on a holiday, and here's their names. Okay, great. That's super cool and very useful. But I think that content professionals, what we're going to see are things called AI copilots. There'll be little helper tools that come along for the ride with you. For example, in the component content management space that we talked about earlier, with technical documentation being the chief users of those kinds of systems, they need assistance to help them reduce the pain of creating this modular content, because they weren't educated as children and throughout adulthood to write modular tiny pieces of content. Excuse me. They were educated to write in the narrative, to start at the beginning and tell the whole story in one big long chunk, right? And you break it up in little paragraphs, and that's what you do. But today, it's a lot more complicated to write validated XML content and to make sure that you do it right. But if you have a guide that's an AI tool that can actually help you along the way and say, hey, what are you trying to create? And then you tell it, hey, I want to create, a product data specification sheet. And it says, hold on, let me go get the template for that for you, And then it pre-populates everything for you and put your cursor right where you need to go. Hey, now write up whatever you're going to write. I think that's the secret. It's going to be helping people do the more cumbersome work, like learning how to use a markup language or how to convert a piece of content from one format to another. Yes, it's intellectually possible that we as writers can do that, but that's not writing. Those are tasks related to writing. And so I think that those busy work tasks, we are going to see more and more automated. And if you think about it, Larry, it's kind of the natural generation from typewriter to word processor. Remember during the word processor era, all of a sudden there were jobs that went away. Typesetters were no longer needed. People did not have to mess around with fonts because the writer used to write it on a typewriter and give it to somebody who turned it into the beautiful font that you saw in the newspaper, right? But those people's jobs went away because the personal computer gave us desktop publishing. So writers became in charge of selecting fonts. Well, now writers are in charge of building the structure, determining the taxonomy, assisting with delivery, tagging content for SEO, which is a totally different thing that has nothing to do with that, right? So we have so many jobs. Why not have the AI Copilot manage our day? What things should we get done first if the AI Copilot knows our goal is to complete XYZ piece of content? Maybe the AI could keep an eye on you. And I don't mean that in a spy kind of way. We hear all day long that we're interrupted many times, and that, by notifications and things, and it takes us off target, and we're not able to overcome the cognitive friction, so we end up slower than we normally are. Maybe this is the power. The AI Copilot helps us do the best work possible, manages our time, pushes the distractions out of the way, and helps us get to a final product faster, but without auto-generating it all by itself.
Yeah, as you're saying that, you're reminding me of like these two things, really familiar concepts to me and a lot of people in content and design world, but that notion of cognitive overload and the notion of friction. And you just tied those together really nicely. I really appreciate that. You also just reminded me of this quote. I think it was Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, who said this thing, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about jobs. And we're like, I mean, there's some risk that people will lose their jobs, but he has said that, like, and runs the AI thing out there, that AIs are really good at task accomplishment, but not so much at jobs. And what you just described is a way to work this stuff into the workflow. Like, that boring crap that you want to another way I think about it is we all have like 20 interns sitting there at our desk with us, helping us.
Yeah. And think about an AI Copilot as an editor. So let's say that companies think it's necessary to have writers and editors, and they're separate roles. And then a writer then finishes a draft and passes it down the line to the editor. And the editor does the function of proofreading. Well, we already know that we have tools on our desktop that can do most of that work already. So really, is the person's job to edit, or does the editor now become an augmenter? Do they add additional semantics to the content? Do they think, there's a better way to say this? The writer was in a hurry because he's got 45 projects to do, but I'm here and I've got time. I wonder if I could make this better. So I feel like there's just opportunity to mimic other industries. Surgery is a great example. Surgeons use scalpels. They were metal pieces of blade that would cut through skin, right? Today, there are things of laser scalpels. Laser scalpels require electricity. There's a plug or battery, or there's other things. It doesn't feel exactly the same. It's not the same exact form factor. And so physically, for a surgeon to hold a scalpel, require a newer scalpel, a laser scalpel, is different than the physical scalpel. And so that change is better. The surgeon knows it's better. It's less risky for the patient. It's a smaller incision, less risk of infection. It's all good. It means that they'll have less risk of being sued in a lawsuit, right? So everything is good, faster, better, cheaper. Just like what we say about content. We want to do it faster, better, cheaper, but we don't want to lose any quality. We want to make sure that the customer is happy. The doctor wants to make sure the patient is safe and happy and that everything is done efficiently. But in order to learn it, it's not just enough to buy the new scalpel. You have to learn how to use it. It's a professional grade tool. So lots of people in content don't use professional grade tools. They use amateur tools. And so do you want a surgeon with the amateur tool, or do you want a surgeon with the best professional grade tool with the least amount of infection risk and the fastest recovery time? And the answer is always, yes, I want that. Well, customers are the same. They want the best content experience as fast as they can get it without a lot of hoopla. They don't want any risk. They don't want any uncertainty. And if we use mediocre approaches and less than the powerful tools that we have available to us, I think we're doing a disservice to the customer, and that can't be good for customer experience.
Yeah, and I now have this other image in my head of all the content people sitting around in surgical scrubs with little assistants around them. But hey, Scott, I can't believe it. We're already coming up close to time. These always go way too quick. But hey, before we wrap, is there anything that you want to revisit from the conversation, or that you just want to make sure we get to before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think all this together adds up to one thing, which is we are moving toward a world where we need to be capable of delivering at scale self-service environments for people, regardless of whether we're entertaining them, informing them, educating them, or helping them in some kind of way. It's about being respectful, and recognizing that it's doable. And I think the pandemic made it possible for the folks who thought maybe they couldn't do it to have to try. And I think many companies were surprised at how good they became at delivering self-service, and that there are even companies who have said, wow, like X percent of our traffic or X percent of our revenue now comes through our self-support, which we didn't even have. It didn't even exist 3 years ago before the pandemic. So I almost feel like the pandemic fueled this self-service movement. And now here we are. We need to be able to deliver self-service support that delights people, gives them a great customer experience, takes advantage of artificial intelligence in ways that are useful to both the content creator and the content consumer. And then we unify everything, package it up, and make it a professional offering. I think that's where we're headed.
Nice. And it sounds like you described all the tooling we have for it and the ways to do it. Well, yeah, thanks for wrapping that all up. Hey, one very last thing, Scott. What's the best way for folks to stay in touch if they want to follow you or connect online?
I'm trying to do what I just said everybody else should do, which is unify all of my content. And while I'm not all the way there yet, I am unifying everything at a place called thecontentwrangler.com. So it's the word THE or thecontentwrangler.com. And you can get pretty much anything that I publish there. Also, I publish a lot of webinars. I do about 3 or 4 shows a week. They'll be archived. Access will be available from thecontentwrangler.com as well.
Cool. Well, I'll put that in the show notes as well. Thanks so much, Scott. Always good to catch up with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Larry. I really appreciate being here.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.